We have an exciting partnership to announce before we get into today's Scuttlebutt. Scuttlebutt has been asked to join Reads Across America Radio, a 24/7 internet radio station where you can listen to veteran stories 24/7. You can find that on the iHeartRadio app. You can also find it on their website, readsacrossamerica.org. The Scuttlebutt will be featured Friday nights at 9 p.m. and Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. If you don't know anything about Reads Across America, they're an incredible organization, all dedicated to honoring veterans and those who gave all in service to our country. Check out the Scuttlebutt on their radio station and all the other programs that they have on their 24/7 radio station, again, on iHeartRadio app or readsacrossamerica.org. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit in Western PA whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. You can find out everything going on with the VBC, all the programs we have on offer, by visiting our website, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org. And every once in a while here on The Scuttlebutt, I have on a guest who's also not a veteran, and we end up talking a bit about what their mission is, what they are doing in their life that is connected to veterans in some way. But I thought to have on to this particular episode Tressa Glover, who is the host of the Pittsburgh podcast Yinz Are Good. She'll describe what Yinz Are Good means, why she uses the word yins if you're not a Pittsburgher and listening in. But I've known Tressa for quite a long time. And for those of you who have listened to the Scuttlebutt for some time, you know that I have a background in acting. Well, Tressa, I met during that time as an actor. During the pandemic, she started this podcast, and we get into why she started it and how many episodes she's in, the mission that she has for it. She actually pulled two veterans from our network, had them on the program, and she also has a bit of military family history that we get into. But I thought that this episode was a great sort of part two to last week's conversation with Stu Blackwell, a veteran who I had a really open and honest and poignant conversation with about the military-civilian divide. Him being a veteran, myself not, we both were able to ask each other some really honest questions. But I thought that this conversation, which also has thematically questions of the military-civilian divide, but between two civilians, we were able to talk a bit more about how we perceive the military, how we are able to talk to veterans. And I think it was a very educational conversation. Tressa is wonderful. I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. And if you do, please check out her podcast, Yinz Are Good. She's doing some great things here in the Western PA, Pittsburgh region, just highlighting people that are out there doing good mission work, people that are passionate about bringing good to our communities. And that's really needed at a time like this. So please like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. And make sure that you like, share, subscribe to the Yinz Are Good podcast. And you can always reach out to me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org with any thoughts or questions, or if you have any ideas for future episodes, I'm all ears. And otherwise, thanks for watching and supporting us, and enjoy the show. Tressa Glover, so excited for you to join me here on the Scuttlebutt. You are the host of Yinz Are Good. Among with many other things that you have done, you are just sort of a jack of all trades, or would you say a Jackie of all trades? I think that we can coin that term. Yeah?
I think I like that.
Yeah, you're
Jackie
of all trades. But it's so exciting to have you here, part of the Scuttlebutt. I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Welcome to the program.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and it's so nice to see you. I am Tressa Glover. I am the host of a podcast called Yinz Are Good, which is based here in Pittsburgh. For those of you who may not be familiar, Yinz is Pittsburgh's version of y'all or yous. So Yinz. But it's basically celebrating all of the good stuff that's going on out there. And, having people come on, chat with folks who are doing good stuff in the community, good things for their neighbors, people who are helping people, just the goal being wanting to get the good stuff out there that we don't always hear about. And I also am an actor and theater producer and writer, Jackie of all trades.
Jackie of all trades. And we should tell our audience. We should tell our audience that if it's the first time you've heard the Scuttlebutt, I am a civilian. I'm not a veteran. And Tressa, you are also not a veteran, a civilian. But you come from a military family. We're going to dive into that history here in a minute or two. I want to sort of hit home Yinz Are Good right off the hop here, because Yinz Are Good it came out of pandemic time when we were all sort of secluded in our own little bubbles in our houses. And how did this idea come to you? And how have you built the podcast?
Yeah, so I had the idea a little bit before the pandemic of wanting to do a podcast. Now, I listen to podcasts, have zero technical skill or knowledge about how to put one together, but it was coming from the idea of so my acting background and just as an artist background of being a storyteller by nature, but feeling that I was needing to connect with people in a different way. And I didn't quite know what that was, but I knew it involved storytelling somehow. But the best way, because to me, I feel we're all so much more alike than we realize. And it's by talking to each other and listening to each other that we learn this. And so just thinking about, is there a way to connect? What could we do? Something like that. And I had the feeling that I wanted to at least start it out as being Pittsburgh centric, my hometown as well. Mm-hmm. So then as the pandemic kicked in, it began to all come together. The idea of let's get the good news out there, because it is still out there, despite all of the other. We just don't hear about it as much, but there is as much good out there. And so it all started coming together in that way. And it's grown. I also ask listeners to share their stories of gratitude, people are grateful for and why, acts of kindness that have changed their life, which can mean just changing their day, making them smile on a day they didn't think they could, but asking people to share those as well. And so folks, I share those on the show, but then also it turned into now interviewing, but I say it in quotes because it's really just chatting with people, but who are making a difference. It's groups, organizations, it's individuals. I had a girl who started in 7th grade, what is now Socks with a Mission. And now it has grown to thousands of pairs of socks that go to homeless people in our Pittsburgh region and now into Ohio. And she started literally in 7th grade. She wanted to do something. So it's all of that. And that's how it all formulated and continues to grow and evolve, because that's important to me too. Kind of what else can it be? Or, what else? Yeah.
Is there something that you've learned along the way with Yinz Are Good that you kind of weren't expecting when you first started it?
Mm-hmm. The first thing I would say is how men meet. So I learned while doing this that Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is, for those who may not know, but has more nonprofits than any other county in the country.
I didn't even know that.
And now the more I do this, the more it makes absolute sense that that's true. And I don't even only talk to nonprofits, right? Like I was saying, I'm talking to everybody, right? Anybody who, who's doing good. But that was one of the first things that really struck me. And just how many, and again, so many of them are smaller. And that's what I try to focus on too, perhaps the people you haven't heard of yet. And so that's one of the biggest things. And what has struck me the most, and because it's happened several times now, is these organizations that have been founded, and they have been founded out of trauma or tragedy in somebody's life, in a family's life. And, they're able to get through that, get themselves through it, get their families through it, and then turn around and grab onto the other people who are going through it and help them along by this organization that they have founded, because they know this has happened to me, it has happened or is going to happen to so many other people. And I want to provide for them maybe something that wasn't available to me, or I know what these people might need during this time. And so I'm here to provide for them and to befriend them and to help them. And that always is just, it's so moving, and it's inspirational beyond, because it's inspirational enough, or like I say, it's enough to get through a thing. It's enough to get through whatever you have to get through. And then, afterwards or during, making that choice and being in a place where you can say, well, you know what can I do for others that are also there? And so that has just probably been the most. I just feel I'm so grateful to have had these conversations that I've had with people.
I love that. And for our listeners, Tressa and I, we have a long history, mostly in the acting world. A lot of the Scuttlebutt listeners who've been with me for quite a long time know of my acting history. And the year that you and I were in our first show together was 2 decades ago.
No, not we were children. We were
we were
prodigies. We were.
I love what you're saying about this idea of storytelling, but also the nonprofits and the missions that they're on, because I'll chime in with sort of VBC, though, the organization, the nonprofit that I produced the Scuttlebutt through, though it wasn't, I think, built through trauma. Veterans who approach and are a part of the VBC programs, Scuttlebutt included, have found that the platform that we provide for them to be able to share their stories is a way to deal with trauma, or being with their friends, other veterans, like-minded individuals. It's a community, and it goes back to sort of our mission of connect, educate, heal, and what you said, inspire. The ability to get people together and have a shared bond. But the nice thing is that it's not just veteran to veteran, that we invite civilians into these programs, into this space, to hear these stories, because it means something for the veterans to be able to share their experiences with civilians, so that they feel like they are we want to say bridge military civilian divide, but have other people share in their stories, understand them, learn from what they've been through. And so many of you said these nonprofits come out of the trauma of what somebody experienced. They realize that a mission needs to be developed, that other people are going to need help. But I'm so excited that Pittsburgh has so many people that want to develop mission-based work, because it's like, you want to talk about Yinz Are Good, so much good comes out of that mission-based work.
Oh my gosh. It just keeps going. It's like that ripple effect. It's that it just keeps going. And it is, and to your point too about community, and because that's what it is. It provides a community of, this is not a word, but I'm going to use it and make it one. But, like experienced individuals, right? So, when you say, oh, like-minded, but folks who are have in common certain experiences, certain whatever that is, and bringing them together, and they probably would not have met otherwise. And just knowing how powerful is it knowing you're not alone? How powerful is it to hear others and to join with others, and regardless of whether you're sharing your actual stories that are similar or not, but just knowing that you're in this community of others who can understand you in a way that many others can't. I don't think you can't put the importance of that, I don't think, can be overstated. I just think that from the beginning, you're put in a situation where you're like, okay, these people, we have a bond already.
Do you think it's your background in acting that started the passion for storytelling, and understanding that, like, in the pandemic time, theater was sort of non-existent, and that passion was that sparked the fire? Like, how did that passion for storytelling start for you?
Probably genetic, because so I'm Irish Italian. You may have noticed, for those of you watching, there's a hand situation going on. So I definitely, I literally come from a line of storytellers on both sides, just in general. So it's funny when you look back, right, at when you're younger, growing up, and you're like, oh yeah, right, this is how everyone, right, everyone grew up with these lengthy stories. Or my Italian side, just music. My grandfather would grab the accordion, and there would be sing-alongs, and you're like, oh sure, this is everyone. They're like, no, this is not everyone. But so I think, first of all, just my upbringing is I think that is a big part of it, and that I was supported and encouraged to, as far as an actor, how lucky I was to be supported and encouraged in that way to pursue that. So I think, but I also think the reason that acting always appealed to me was the psychology of it. When I look back now and think about it, it's because what we do is the why of people, why do people do what they do is pretty much what it breaks down to. That's your acting lesson for the day. You're welcome. That's it. That's all you need to know.
That's a free
But
one. The first one's free.
That's right. So, right, that's what it comes down to. And so thinking about that, the why, right? Who is this person? What is, what are the relationships, what situations the character in? But I'm so much like that in my real life. I'm so curious. I love meeting new people. I love hearing people's stories and the why and the who of who they are. So the older I get, when I'm like, oh, I think that's why I was drawn to that profession or that part of the art world, because and also I should say too, also the history, also the past. I think it's so important, not just with your contemporaries or learning about people, but learning about what came before and how important that is, and all of those stories. So I think that's kind of all wrapped together.
Well, I think it's very interesting, because going back to this sort of acting world, whenever you're in a show or in a film, you're the storyteller. You're researching to figure out, what is this character's motivation? What is their history? What is their family situation? What's the era look like? How do they walk? What do they do? That's that curiosity of acting that makes you, and I've witnessed it, you're an exceptional actress. But the idea of like diving into a character's story. And my point being is that as you created Yinz Are Good, coming out of that realm of doing your own research and creating telling the story yourself and interviewing people for their story, what differences did you find there?
Oh my goodness. That's good. That's good, Sean. I accept. No, oh goodness. I think, well, first of all, listening being the key to it. Okay. Yep. So in acting, of course, we talk, that's also a huge part of acting, which, okay, I'm going to give a second point. Listening in acting is actually the most important part, to listen to the other actors. But anyway, but I think in this case, it is the other person is leading it. The person that I'm speaking to is the person, to this point, they're the person telling the story, and it's their story. So they start it, and then listening to them and gleaning, the bits out of it, and, oh, can you please, more about this, or, oh my gosh, what inspired that? But they're the ones who are the main storyteller. And then I have the really cool opportunity to delve in more, and that's probably where the acting part of it comes in. I'm sure some of the questions I come up with are based in all the layers that we're used to doing as actors, right? Oh, but why? But
why? Yeah, you're used to asking those. Let's dive into that rabbit hole question. That's
exactly. Instead of someone may say something that is absolutely, yes, it has a lot of information there, but the layers of why start to come in, or how, or whatever.
I've never been able to put a good point on it, but that's exactly how I feel when I get to sit down with a veteran. I get to sit down, and I'm in a very, I would say, odd and unique and fortunate position to be able to ask them questions that they probably wouldn't normally sit down with a regular everyday civilian and get to answer. I can ask some pretty in-depth stuff, or some very personal things. I always get to say that, hey, I'm a civilian, I get to ask dumb questions, because there's, they might say something that I'm like, I have no idea what you just said. So, and they're like, well, yeah, just, it means quick reaction force. Like, come on. But you put such a fine point on that curiosity of the sort of the actor side of my head, of diving into people or their characters and saying, why, I love that. Thank you for that, because I've never been able to like articulate like that feeling of like, well, why is it fun to sit down and ask somebody questions about their motivations, or why they just decided to do something, that was life threatening.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because there always is. There's always, and that's connected to, if we take the time,
Hmm.
and again talking about it in our real lives,
Yeah.
but take the time that when you're talking to somebody, if you really listen, I think it becomes clear that there are more questions that can be asked. They don't have to be super intrusive or anything.
Right.
But there's always, you can always learn a little more, and then that just continues, it just multiplies how much, where that person is coming from, and just your understanding of who that person is.
I think this is I hope that people that are listening to Scuttlebutt now maybe go back 1 week in our production schedule and look at my interview with Stu Blackwell. I'm going back to this because I feel like a lot of what you and Tressa and I are talking about here today, it's interesting because he was a Marine Corps veteran. And just like I just said, I was able to sit down and ask him some really pointed personal questions. And he in turn was able to come back to me as a civilian and ask some pointed personal questions about my beliefs about veterans, which was a really honest and awesome conversation, not one that you would normally get. But it was all back to the idea of military civilian divide and how we are listening to each other, how we are communicating with each other. And I mentioned this for our Scuttlebutt audience because a lot of what I've tried to do throughout the production of Scuttlebutt is offer an avenue and be sort of a model of how to talk to a veteran. But I feel like the topics that you and I are talking about are right on par with, like, if you were to sit down or meet a veteran, what would you want to do? How would you extend the conversation beyond thank you for your service? And really it would just be like sitting down and listening, and just listening, ask a question, and then there might be another question that comes along, because if they would like to sit down and chat with you a bit, then your human instinct is going to take over, your curiosity, and you'll be able to open up the conversation more.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had part of your full slate of episodes, you had reached out to me and had some veterans come on to Yinz Are Good.
I did.
And
It was in the episode, I want to say 74. It was around Veterans Day of 2022.
the fact that you
Donald,
know which numbered episode, because I'm like,
I,
oh, we're over 100 now, so I kind of lost count. But
I know.
that's pretty good.
And we're we're coming up on 90. So this might be the end of my being able to do that. I may be this, but yeah. So it was Donald Nemchick and
Yep.
Adam Zafu. So Donald, Vietnam veteran, and Adam was Iraq and Afghanistan. Oh, it was, and talking about their journeys and talking about all they're doing to help. Again, there it is, to help others. Yeah, on there.
It's two very different experiences. Our Scuttlebutt audience, I keep referring to them, but they know both of those. Dave Don Demchek, he has joined me for several episodes. Adam Zafuto, a very famous Scuttlebutt episode where he broke down his feelings on the fall of Kabul and the end of the Afghan war. We had a very honest and open conversation about that. Was there something about having them both on and chatting with them about their experiences that sort of opened up your mind a bit to what the military is? I want to go into your military family history here in a minute, but was there something that you weren't expecting whenever you talked with them?
I think with Don, it was the first real in-depth conversation I've gotten to have with a Vietnam veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard about what that time, I wasn't alive during that time, but I've heard about what that time period was like, what it was like for the veterans,
Coming
especially
home.
when they came back.
Yep.
Oh, and I was familiar in a way that I could be, but it was the first really in-depth conversation that I got to have. And so hearing it from a veteran, and also hearing his story about his roots and where he came from. And because in his neighborhood, you were expected, like you were going to go fight. You weren't going to not go, regardless of how the emotions of the politics of it, you were expected to go. So overall with him, it was powerful to hear again, right, from a person who had served and then coming back, and what that was like, the effect it had on him.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, hearing how he has, decided to and chosen to help others, and how, and across the generations too, how
Mm-hmm.
important it is, as he was saying, that we have to keep talking to each other. We have to keep hearing each other's stories, and we have to keep, those lines open. So that's really with Don, what struck me. And with Adam, it was funny. We discovered we both went to Hampton High School. I'm
Wow.
older than Adam, but at the same time, I'm like, of course I am. No, but we discovered that. That was a cool little connection. He's like, Hampton. So, and his wife was on as well. So they were both on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was interesting too, because we talked about, and I guess too, we were speaking about civilian and military. So in that same, conversation. And so having both of them and that perspective, and he spoke a little about Kabul, about the fall of Kabul, as you were referring to, and as your listeners know, how deeply affected he was by that. And that, to me, was one of the main things that stood out, because I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about his exact position that he was in, spending all that time rebuilding, doing all of that, and then hearing about, that's what, that was just a perspective that I hadn't thought about the service people who were over there and all they did, and their mind, and so for them going through what is happening to those people.
Completely.
How devastating. I just hadn't thought about that.
And it's not, and myself as a civilian, I've talked about this on the podcast a lot of times, and especially last week with Stu Blackwell, just the idea of like, we all experienced 9/11 in our own way, how we experienced it, what we watched, all that stuff. And then like, we live in an era of the all volunteer force. So I remember being young at that time, and honestly being afraid of like, I don't want to go and be shot at. Like, I don't want to do that, And though I kept up with the war over those 20 years that we were there, in some ways, there were definitely times where it was just like, it was happening and it was sort of in the background of my life. And, but it wasn't until the last 3 years that I got to sit down with veterans, especially like you were able to do with a Vietnam veteran and an Afghanistan war veteran. The mirror of the fall of Saigon and the fall of Kabul, and sort of like a lot of the Vietnam vets in our network were like, how is this happening again? And then the Afghanistan war veterans are saying like, what is going on? Like, we just had blood, sweat, and tears in this conflict, and suddenly it's like all falling apart around us. And you're right. Like, I wouldn't have thought of that had I not been in a room of Vietnam veterans and hearing their pain, hearing their stories, hearing what they felt, what they thought about what was going on. And thankfully, you and I are both in a position where we've been able to sit down with them, with veterans, and hear some of this, because whatever that is, whatever lesson we were able to glean from that, helps that divide, helps us understand a bit of what they're going through. And thankfully, we had two veterans join you, and the veterans in our network join us, that are open to having that conversation with us. How lucky are we to sit down and say, they came back from Vietnam, they didn't talk about it. A lot of guys came back, threw their uniform in the trash, and went out into life because they were told, don't wear it outside of the airport, don't even wear it off the plane, and then they didn't talk about it for 30 years. But to be in a time where veterans will come back and be willing to chat with us, just helps to open up that conversation. It helps to start that conversation beyond, again, thank you for your service. It's nice to sit down and say, well, where did you serve? When did you serve? Why did you enlist? All of those sort of easy questions that, like I said, will open up those rabbit holes.
Yeah.
You military family was, we say military family, but it was your grandfather who served, correct?
Correct.
Paternal or maternal?
Paternal.
And he was World War II?
World War II.
Yeah.
Thomas Glover, and he just passed away 4 years ago. He was 96.
Wow.
And yes, so he was in the Navy, and talk about being grateful for. He did talk about the war.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as which stories, we didn't hear any of the traumatic one. We meaning the grandchildren. There are many
Right.
of us. And I don't even think with his kids, like I don't think necessarily my dad and his siblings heard too many of those, but he talked about so much of it. He had his flight log
Oh,
still.
was he a pilot?
He was a radio man in the he was in a
Okay.
CBY. CBY? Yes, that's right. And
Mhm.
he was a radio man in the South Pacific. And yeah, he had his flight log. He went to all of his reunions through his mid to late 80s. And they were all, the squadron, they were still getting together and getting those. And he talked so much. Oh, photos. My dad has one of his photo albums. I mean, a thick one with pictures with them on the sleeping on the wings of their plane. And I mean, in the, and okay, so what I did South Pacific in high school, the musical. I played Bloody Mary, character actor. That's me. Okay. But he had a grass skirt that when he was in South Pacific during World War II, he had gotten one and had it all this time, and he gave it to me, and I still have it, an actual grass skirt. But
What was he drafted or did he enlist?
So he had a desk job with the Navy, and he went to them and asked to fight. Wow. Because he wanted to fight. And both of his brothers, he and both of his brothers were all fighting World War II, and they all came home.
Wow.
Which is stunning.
Yeah.
He was in the Navy. One brother was a Marine and one was in the Army.
Were they all Pacific Theater?
Yes. Oh, and there's a great story that was in the Pittsburgh Press in 1945. And I think in the same episode that Don and Adam were in, I think is when I shared it because I found the article that there was a typhoon. So his one brother was on the USS Pittsburgh, and they were all in the same region, and a typhoon, I guess, kept them all very like close enough to each other. And one of my uncles realized it. And so went to his commanding officer. I hope I'm using the right term, but went and said, "Oh, both of my brothers, one's on the USS Pittsburgh, and my grandfather was on a aircraft carrier." And so my their commanding officer was like, "Here," and threw him his keys to his Jeep and let him and a couple of his buddies drive the Jeep to the water so that on the USS Pittsburgh, they sent a raft or whatever out to him so he could get on and be reunited with his brother. I had chills because they hadn't seen each other in over a year and they were all fighting. Mm-hmm. So they got to spend the evening on the USS Pittsburgh. And my grandfather couldn't get off of his carrier, but they were across from each other and were waving and waving, and they could all see each other.
Oh, that's great.
And they had this wonderful reunion. And I just loved that story. And so I found the Pittsburgh Press got a hold of that and wrote about it and interviewed their mother at the time. And boy, I think about that, all three of your sons. And the youngest one, on his 19th birthday, he went when he was 18. And I think it was when he was on 19. It was one of I'm trying to remember because it was my great uncle, but it was one of the big battles. It was on his 19th birthday that he went into it.
Wow.
But all three of them made it home. But yeah, my grandfather had, because of a skill that he had, he was at a desk and he would have stayed there, and he went and he said, "No, I want to fight."
Mm-hmm. What a different mindset in World War II of just like, but certainly during the last 20 years, there have been guys who were not frontline or not, inside the wire, at least on base or deployed. It probably requested to be. They wanted to be out there. So he came home and he talked with the family about it. It wasn't military wasn't something that was mysterious in your household.
No, he was so open, and like I said, with pictures, with, and that's what I mean, like just these stories that, oh, they kept. Okay, so between the time when he said I want to go fight and then training, so he ended up in Florida. My grandmother and he had met my grandmother, and they wanted to get married before he went over. So she and her mother went down to his base in Florida, Pensacola. That makes sense, I think. Yeah. And that she was the witness, and they got married. And he left a few months later, but she was pregnant with my uncle by the time he left. Mm. So it was about 2 years. I think my uncle was about 2 before when my grandfather made his way home and met him. But so even
so
that
she
story,
was pregnant when he left, and then he
pregnant
would
when
get
he
back,
left.
and oh man.
So Uncle Tommy was already a toddler. Yeah. So even that, like we knew that story. Like, we knew the genesis of that. They wrote love letters back and forth, and they kept them in a big shoebox. And when my grandmother died, Pap, we called him, he said, oh, yeah, you can look, because he had them. And of course the heavy redactions, right, that you see, but they kept all of those. And but yeah, so even, we were aware of that. We were aware of, I remember the first time I visited an aircraft carrier in, I want to say, North Carolina years ago. I called Pap to be like, oh, I just went through, I don't understand how you lived on it. Like, right, here I am, like, I don't understand. He was laughing. But then he started telling me more, like it was, because I knew I wanted to call him and talk to him about it, and I could. And he was happy to share all of that. And he talked about, he became a boxer. So he would,
oh, boxing was so huge.
oh,
And
he
still
was a
kind of
huge,
is, but boy, back in that time, it was like, we're not got nothing to do. Everybody would get together and they'd box.
It's like, so we boxed. And, at Thanksgivings when we would have, because so my dad was one of 6, so there were a lot of us. And when we would all get together for Thanksgiving, we'd be making the mashed potatoes. He always was the supervisor of peeling the potatoes, because he also, for a time, was in the kitchen, was working in nope, it's not called a kitchen, the galley.
Yep. I think, I'll say, I think,
yeah.
and I'm probably going to get an email. They're going to be like, nope, okay, you're wrong. Both wrong. And it's so funny because the Navy, it's called one thing. The Army called another thing. Chow Hall, it's like.
Oh, no. I'm going to go with galley, and my apologies if I'm wrong. But peeling the potatoes, and oh my goodness. But in a very fun way. Like he was such a, here's the other thing. Gentle. Now, again, and my dad and his siblings would say, right, you're different with your grandkids than you are with your kids. But he really was. He was this gentle, believe it or not, he didn't talk that much. He was a little quieter, but good man, and had relationships with all of us, grandkids, kids. He was just, and funny, so as we're doing the potatoes, he would just stand there like, oh, and he'd be like, you missed a spot. But of course, we're like, you're the literal, like, more than we do. So it even in, I bring those up because even in those kinds of ways, it was infused. It was just infused in everyday life, even, let alone when he would share or talk about sleeping, like I said, on the wings of their plane, which, baffling to me. And in some of the photos even that he would share with us, you could see in the hills behind them, the Japanese behind them. I mean, you can see them in the photos, but he was open and sharing all of that, and how his squadron secured Tokyo Bay for the signing of the surrender there. And they are the ones who flew home the infamous or the famous Iwo Jima picture when they're with the flag.
Yeah.
They're the ones who had that film.
Wow.
And they're the ones. So just in those ways. And Morse code. Until the day he died, he remembered Morse code, and every once in a while would do it. He would just be like, do, 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 do. He would spell things in Morse code. I mean, there were always, so that to me is part of what I'm so grateful for, because like I said, it was infused in even like simple, small ways, in addition to just his being open and sharing about his time. and even that when he, and that alone, like we were talking about, but the fact that he said, no, I want to go fight, because he could have just stayed
How many years was he
working.
in?
So he went in early, I think altogether a year and a half
That
by the
he was
time he
deployed for
went
a year
over.
and a half.
Yes, deployed.
So he
Or
might have been in
just,
for 3 to 4 years, like in the
yeah,
Navy.
would be my guess.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be my guess. To putting it all together.
And it obviously had a large effect on him as a person. That,
Yeah.
and we find that so much at BBC that their time in service is such a small fraction of their entire life, but it makes up such a large portion of who they are.
Mm.
Did you find that there were things that, other than the peeling of potatoes, were there things that he did militarily? Did he line up all the grandkids and it was like, okay, this is how we're going to do things? Or was he, I want to say
No.
militant, because you could be militant, but it was like, there are a lot of
Yeah.
guys that, in our network that'll be like, yeah, the kids have to square off the sheets. Like, that's what they do.
No, never with us. And I don't ever remember my dad or his siblings talking about that either.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there was definitely, and my dad, and he would say this if he were sitting here with me, he liked to get into trouble. Okay. But, he was, whatever, in middle school, high school, right? He was doing kind of, but he would always say, or one time that Pep had said to him, it was something at school, and he came home and he said, don't you want to hear my side? And Pep said, you don't have a side. If the school calls and you did something, that's it. There was that sense of, and that could be a few, but that sense of, nope, the people in charge said that you did this thing. That's it. There's it.
Yeah.
You don't have a side.
Right.
So I think in those ways, those kind of things came out, made their way through. And I love, to your point too, though, of percentage wise, how many years of their lives are spent versus. I always would think about this, especially with him, because of what a wonderful father and grandfather he was, and husband. I should say this: my grandparents, every night before they went to bed, recited the same poem to each other. They each like split it in half, and they had it, someone had crocheted or whatever, and it hung above their bed. These two.
Wow.
Yeah, they were, yeah. So, he's the real deal. This is, and so I often would think, like, but he fought in a war, like, and I always, even at a younger age, as a civilian, was, trying to reconcile those things, or wondering, I can't imagine what he experienced, what he saw,
Mm-hmm.
what that day to day is, the day to day of that, the hour, the minute to minute of it. And coming back, and in his case, back to your wife and your child who you're meeting for the first time, and back to, he works at the railroad, but back to your,
Yep.
job. And to me, that's, of course, is something that I can't understand.
No, and I never even attempt to try to understand that. I just sort of say, like, wow, the sacrifice that you had to make is so extreme. Certainly, especially with, the fact that I have a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had to leave and say, I'm going to leave and I may come back, I might not. And when I see you again, you're going to be 2 years older and you're not going to know who I am. Like that to me is just mind blowing. Can't wrap my head around that idea. And we've had on guests before, spouses before, we talked about the other side of that coin of your husband is leaving and they're going to go fight for the country, and you just had a kid. What is going through your mind? How are your sacrifice, like you're sacrificing that family, that time, that all of it. You think about your grandmother. Like, it is not easy to raise a kid, and let alone on your own, with the idea of like, is he going to come back or not?
That's
For
exactly,
two
and that, like
years.
you're saying, that other side of it, being on the other side, and of course you,
Did she ever talk about it? Sorry to interrupt.
um, not too much. She didn't avoid it,
Right.
but I think I would have. So she died when I was, I want to say 23 or 24.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we would have had a little more time, I would have asked her some of the questions that you and I talked about now, like, a little, as I would have gotten a little older
Mm-hmm.
and could have, and I think she would have, but she did talk about I mean, I knew, that they were writing back and forth, but I think part of it could have been because my age, because maybe I was, younger and I didn't have children at that rate. And maybe parts of it that just, I wouldn't have thought to specifically ask about, even though I always thought about that. I know that she lived with her mother during that time, which, and she was 20. That's the other thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remembering how young every they all were.
Oh, completely. She was
It's
extremely young. And
Yeah.
and I say this for the Yinz Are Good audience. If you're chiming in, you're like hearing about the scuttlebutt for the first time, go back and look at our episode with the Veteran Spouse Project. And it's my conversation with both of these incredible women that opened my eyes more to the idea that, yes, we always want to talk to the veteran. We always want to like ask them questions, but their service also extends to their family. So talking with their spouse about what their experience, what their sacrifices are, how it was whenever, he or she was deployed, they have a story to tell as well. And that's why I was very interested to see, because even back at that time, it was it was a very different nation back in World War II. Everybody knew somebody that was serving. If you didn't have a family member or 10 family members serving,
Right.
it was a lot
Right.
more common. But we don't ever think, I especially, I'm guilty of this as a civilian. I don't ever think of asking the family of the veteran what they were going through.
Mm-hmm. Because I would think about, and I never asked Nana, Mary Jane, that's her name, but I never asked Nana because this I know was in my head at the time, because it sounds so morbid, or at least that's what I describe it as. But especially when you're pregnant and then you have the child, and back in that day when how the news not being anywhere near what news is now, coverage is now, and talking about minute to minute and hour to hour, but not knowing if you're going to hear that knock on the door.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you not live in that place all the time? And I would think, I mean, like there are unfortunately many situations that people can find themselves in, right? That you're living minute to minute like that. And you can't survive if you're constantly thinking about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you have a baby, then this is your life changes forever anyway. And so this is now what this is what you get to focus on, and what you get to, but that I know as a younger, and I don't know what that means, but especially like in my teens, when I started to think about it that way, about her being, and just thinking about, about that.
Amy and Leah and I, the Veteran Spouse Project, were chatting sort of about that idea. And I think it was more along the lines of like, you got to keep the house moving forward. And yes, it's always on your mind. But you have this community that you are a part of, and especially the spouses nowadays, where normally they're living in like a military community, and they end up sort of relying on each other for support. It staves off, I think, the minute to minute idea of like, okay, they're gone and I'm not going to see them for 8 months or longer. And, you have to deal with the everyday of living.
Yeah.
And that's a
And
lot.
and it's interesting because when we think about that community for my grandmother living at her mom's, that community for her. So here's something that Nana talked about a little bit, but her mother, when so we're talking we're talking the 1920s when her mother became a nurse, was married, started to have kids. Her parents lived with them also. Her husband died when he was 27 suddenly of a heart attack. She had lost their youngest baby 2 weeks earlier. So my grandmother's mother lost an infant and her husband in a 2 week span. And she wasn't even, I mean, she might have been 26 at that time. I don't know, 25 or 26. So she was a nurse and she had 3 kids and her parents living with them. And she took care of everybody.
I feel like all of us nowadays would just crumble.
I mean, right? Like when you keep adding that on, like you just, you can't. And so that's the house my grandmother grew up in. So then, right, you fast forward a little bit, and this is now here she is, and her husband's divorced. She has this baby, and she's staying with that woman now, her mother. And then so when you think about it in a different way, that community she was in was in that same way, that even though it was different circumstances that her mother had gone through, as far as an environment for her to be in, that was like, here's how you move forward.
Strength.
Here's what you do. Yeah.
Because you can't survive something like that level of tragedy without being strong or it making you stronger.
Right. Yeah, I wish I would have known my great grandmother to get to talk to her. But yeah, she was a strong lady.
Did it help in having that sort of history in your family and sort of that military was something that could be a part of the dinner conversation? Did it help with when you sat down with Dawn and Adam? Do you find it easy to chat with them? Or were you a bit, I want to say tepid? Is that the right word?
I felt comfortable. I think it did. I think growing up with that history absolutely helped me. And I always knew, I think even when I was in high school, because I interviewed Pap for a project for my history class. And, the videotape, I'm putting it in quotes because it was probably a VHS. I don't even know what we were using back then, but kind of on. But I remember knowing then, even that's when I started to realize how special it was that I grew up with him and with him sharing his stories about it. Because not all of my friends had that. And then as I got older, appreciating in an additional way what that did for me as a person, knowing about the past, having a connection to it, but the gratitude and perspective. And so what I grew up with, that I'm just so lucky to have grown up with all that.
This has been awesome. It's so cool to hear about. That's why partially I just like hearing from anybody who has had someone who served in their family, because you get to hear the stories as they were told to them, sitting around the campfire, sort of just hearing it from your parents, or now that we've sort of opened a box, maybe you might be able to go to some family members and say, hey, did what did you call your grandma?
Nana.
Did Nana ever talk about what she went through during the war? Just opening up these sort of rabbit holes of like curiosity to see if there's further stories to be had or told.
And it's so interesting you say that, because after the episode I did with Don and Adam, and I shared the article in the Pittsburgh Press, one of my cousins who he's outside of Philly, but always listens to the show, and he texted and was like, do you have a copy of that article? Oh my gosh. I didn't know. And so even within us, and
Yep.
here I am, I think thinking, oh, I didn't think that, maybe if other cousins didn't know about it or whatever, but it was. So even that, uh, and there was one quick story because Papa must have been 90. He had to be in his 90s when he told me this because I remember
Mm.
saying, where has this story been? And he laughed. And I was like, okay. So when he finally was coming home into San Francisco, right? Taking a
Yep.
ship into San Francisco, there was a huge storm. Do we say hurricane? I don't know what it's on that side. Wow, I am not a geography person, but you know what I mean? But a storm, I think I didn't know if it's like Atlantic versus Pacific. Anywho, that kind of
Yeah.
storm.
Level.
As they're making their way to the point where they were preparing to jump ship, to abandon ship. So you have all of these service people who just made it through the war
Mm-hmm.
on their way home, and they're literally donning the life vests, life jackets. And he said they were minutes away from abandoning ship when whatever it was able to be righted, it was able to be, and they were able to sail through it. And so of course my jaw is like, okay. And
Yeah.
then he's saying, but we get to San Francisco, and then they took a train to New York and then hitchhiked to Pittsburgh, he and a buddy.
Yeah.
And he got home earlier than expected. And it was late at night. And he went up to the house. And I always picture like, here comes Tommy, right? He's up there knocking on the door and no one's answering. And
Yeah.
no one's answering. And he looks across the street and the neighbor's house light is on. So he goes across the street and they answer the door and he's like, hi, I'm home. Can you let Mary Jane? Can you let them know to let me in? And then they called over and then, oh my gosh, Tommy's here.
Oh, wow.
But I don't think any of them knew that story. It just never had come up.
And the funny thing there is most of those guys on that ship, you've heard like some guys that are in the Navy don't know how to swim. So I'm wondering how many of the guys on the ship were just like, oh boy.
Like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yep.
Yeah. He said, oh, the vests were on. And I'm looking at him like, what are you? Okay.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
And these are all, this is what it is. It's just getting together to hear some of these incredible stories. Tressa, I want to end with a couple minutes here of just some fun. Because we're both Pittsburghers. Okay. And because your podcast is called Yinz Are Good.
Yinz Are Real Good.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. And if anybody's listening from outside of Pittsburgh, you may have heard of Pittsburghese. You may have heard of the ways that we speak over here in Western PA. So, and because again, Yinz being like y'all from down south, Yinz is sort of how we say, hey, Yinz guy's going down to the Stellar game. And that's a little bit of it. I would say it's like throw a bunch of marbles in your mouth and try to talk.
That's real good, yeah.
Yeah, it's real good. So I'm going to say a couple Pittsburghese terms, and you have to tell me what they are.
Translator.
We'll start off. This is a phrase. Jeet jet.
Did you eat yet?
So if I'm going to say, did you eat yet in Pittsburghese, I'll be like, hey, jeet jet.
Jeet jet. It's like two words with a J starting both of them. Jeet jet. Mm-hmm. We like to condense, don't take so much time with all the syllables.
Pull it all together. And it's like Primanti's. If you've never been to Pittsburgh or you've heard of Primanti's, it's this restaurant here in Pittsburgh. During the steel mill era, you had very limited time to go on break. So you'd get down to Primanti's, and instead of getting your sandwich and your coleslaw and your fries all on the plate, Primanti's just threw it all together. So if you ever want a Pittsburgh sandwich, go to Primanti's and you're going to get all of it, coleslaw, fries, everything on the sandwich. So that's just like Jeet Jet. Like everything's right there. An easy one. And my grandmother was famous for this. An at.
Oh, an at. So I was trying to think of to use it in a sentence, but it just means and other things. So yeah, I'm trying to think like, but also you don't always have a specific thing you're talking about. That's the thing. Like if you're going to say, are you going to go to the gym? You could say, you're going to go to gym and at, even though there's really no and that and other thing.
Right.
but you can throw it on there.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
sometimes that's the beauty of it, is that it can be used if there might be other things happening or not. And
My
that is
grandmother,
just,
I
yeah.
say grandmother, but I mean my great grandmother. She was famous for the double Annette. I
What's
know.
that?
I know. She would say, "Hey, you going down a grocery store, Annette? Annette?"
Wait
Yeah,
a minute. We can do an episode breaking that down.
Annette,
Oh,
Annette.
that's another level.
I know, Annette, Annette. I mean, I clear as a bell as a little kid, remembering her being like, talking, and she lived on a farm, so she'd be like, "Yeah, go down and feed the horse, Annette, Annette." It was a way to
Okay.
condense all of her things that she did in the farm into like, I did that, and then a whole bunch of other stuff, Annette, Annette.
And then a whole bunch of other ats.
Yep.
Can we bring this back?
Well, you can Annette as much as you want, really.
Let's double the double in that, I
Well,
think.
I think once you hit 100 episodes of Yinz Are Good, it should be Yinz Are Good in that.
Okay. Okay. Done. I mean, that's pretty much rebranding. Got it. I got it.
uh, buggy. What's a buggy?
Oh, it's like what you use at the grocery store, like a grocery cart.
That's right.
That's what I
Uh,
didn't realize was a Pittsburgh thing till I didn't live in Pittsburgh.
mhm.
And then, yeah,
Yeah, did you
I
have the
thought
buggy? The
everyone had
what? The
that.
buggy.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah.
Crick.
Oh, a creek,
Hmm.
a small body of water that trickles behind
Right, the creek.
your
Why are we
house.
calling it a crick? Like, famous also is about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of Pittsburgh is the Lake Pymatuning. But
Yes.
whenever I grew up and I didn't know where Pymatuning was, I didn't know where it was because my grandmother always called it Pymatumi. So imagine Googling Pymatumi and being like, where's Pymatumi? I went there as a kid for years. Pymatumi, where's Pymatumi? Finding out that it was called Pymatuning.
Mm. Well, yeah, that'll do it.
Yep.
You get that though. Yeah.
And we'll finish up with one of my favorites that drives my wife crazy. Sweeper. I'm gonna sweep the floor.
Okay, legit. I thought this was a more universal term.
Mm-hmm.
This would be a vacuum cleaner,
That's right.
a sweeper. Because you say, do you want to sweep? Like if you're referring to a broom, you say sweep. So it's not that far off, but you would say sweeper
Right.
for an instrument that works on your carpets.
So my kids came back from the creek and they drug a whole bunch of dirt through the house. So I had to pull out the sweeper and sweep the floors in that.
And
G-Jet. G-Jet.
this poorly. G-Jet. Oh, let's all implement at least one of these in our day to day.
Help bridge the Pittsburgh country divide.
That's right. That's right. Oh, I love it. I love
Tressa,
it.
it's been a wonderful time here with you today. I will add links to Yinz Are Good, as well as I hope that you share with us the Pittsburgh Press article. I'm sure our veterans would love to see that old article from the Pittsburgh Press. We'll make sure to add that to the description.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I love this collaboration with Yinz Are Good. I'd love to come over onto your platform, chat a bit about VBC, maybe bring
Yes,
a
please.
friend of mine over to that side. You're doing wonderful work here in Pittsburgh and helping to bring all of these stories to the forefront. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for this. I mean, honestly, I could talk another hour at least with you. But just thank you. And thank you for all of this for having me on. And yes, please come on over whenever.
That would be excellent. To our audience, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. And make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Yinz Are Good. If you'd like to reach out to me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. And if you have something good going on here in Pittsburgh and you're listening in and you would love to, put that in Tressa's ear, Tressa, how can someone get in touch with you? How can they support your podcast?
Thank you. They can email us at yinzaregood@gmail.com. And it's all spelled out, Yinz Are Good. And we have a website also, yinzaregood.com, that explains more. And I have links to all of the folks who've been on the show. Any links to the work they're doing, it goes right to their website so you can learn more if you want to volunteer, help them out, whatever. So it's all there too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for coming onto the Scuttlebutt. Let's have you on again to chat more. If you're interested in a military story or a veteran that you would like to interview, please come on the podcast, bring them on, and we'll sit down and have a nice conversation.
Awesome. Would love it. Love it. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. Tobacco-Free Adagio Health has been supporting the podcast for quite some time now. We've been so pleased to be supported by them. They are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health, so they want people to quit. They have classes, nicotine replacement therapy, and a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. And finally, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health advocates for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about what Tobacco-Free Adagio Health offers at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org, or you can check out the 2 Scuttlebutt episodes that featured Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. We had a wonderful representative come on to the podcast, talk to us about all the classes and therapies that they offer. It was 2 wonderful conversations, so I definitely direct you to both of those if you want more information, or just call their free quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. Thank you again, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health, for your support.